Have Yahweh's food laws changed? Did Joshua or Jesus declare all foods clean? Well, to answer that question, let's get a little background information out of the book of Leviticus. And you may think, Leviticus, that's Levitical law, we can forget about that. No, the New Testament refers to Leviticus approximately 90 times. Let's look what happens when Yahweh comes to dwell among his people. The tabernacle had just been erected, and here he comes with his glory in chapter 9. And it reads, Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. When they came out and blessed the people, the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. Then fire came out from before Yahweh and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of the fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. An awesome event. But look what happens immediately in the next chapter, the next verse, so to speak. But now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and consumed them, and they died before Yahweh. Why? Then Moses said to Aaron, It is what Yahweh spoke, saying, By those who come near me, I will be treated as holy. And that means, that word holy is defined as meaning clean and pure. And before all the people, I will be honored. Lesson learned. You and your sons, he's speaking to Aaron here, are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you'll die. Evidently, these two sons, Nadab and Abihu, were drunk when they did this. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You must distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and you must teach the Israelites all the decrees Yahweh has given them through Moses. And you might think, well, that was for Aaron and his sons. But then when we read in 1 Peter 2, chapter 9, or rather verse 9, we see that we are indeed his priests today. So we're to do the same thing. Teach the difference between the clean and the unclean. So, with that foundation, let's now teach holiness and cleanness. Leviticus 11, Yahweh spoke again to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth. In other words, these are food animals, and the rest are not even considered food. Bottom line, he wants no uncleanness within our body, our tabernacle, where he dwells today. There are two simple tests as to what animals we can eat and not eat. Whatever divides the hoof, thus making split hoofs, and chews the cud, among the animals that you may eat. And of course there's a physical and a spiritual application here. On the physical, the animals that meet those tests we can eat. On the spiritual level, if a pastor, a preacher, a teacher does not rightly divide the word of truth, stay away from what he's teaching, and if he does not chew the cud on it, that is, if he doesn't meditate on it over and over, then there's something missing in his words that we should avoid and abstain from. What about Porky? Next verses, and the pig we're not to eat. For though it divides the hoof, thus making a split hoof, it does not chew the cud. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat of its flesh, nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. But you might say, but hey, how about modern technology, microwaves and all, don't we? That do away with the impurities within the pig? You don't have to worry about it? Okay, then let's apply the same precept to the mouse, cockroach, and the buzzard. And if we don't, might we be considered a hypocrite? Catfish, shrimp, and oysters, as he continues. But these you may eat whatever is in the water, all that have fins and scales. Simple two-pronged test. But whatever in the seas and in the rivers that does not have fins and scales, among all the teeming life in the water and among all the living creatures that are in the water, they are detestable things to you, and they shall be abhorrent to you. You shall not eat of their flesh, and their carcasses you shall detest. And by the way, it's repeated again in Deuteronomy 14, these same precepts on food laws, so it's ultra important to be repeated twice. Why does he give these precepts? As he continues in chapter 11, for I am Yahweh your God. Consecrate, therefore, yourselves. Make yourselves clean. And be holy, or clean, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. For I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. And let's note that phrase, you shall be holy, for I am holy. You shall be clean, for I am clean. Edible and non-edible. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten, i.e. what is food and what is not food. And this is going to help us a lot by laying this foundation once we get to the New Testament to understand some of the verses set forth there regarding food. So, how important is this precept? For I am Yahweh who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. How important is this? Well, Peter, years after the sheet lowering vision that he saw there in Acts chapter 10, stated this in 1 Peter 1, verses 15 through 16. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves, also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. You shall be clean, he always says, because I am clean. Is this a big deal with Yahweh, Yahshua? Hebrews 12:14, pursue peace with all men and the sanctification, without which no one will see the Lord. Sanctification means purity, holiness, cleanness. Question, do you want to see Yahshua at his coming? Then we had best be sanctified and clean, body, soul, and spirit. But what about, you might ask, is it only for the Jews, Jewish stuff? I've heard that many times. Well, what about the rest of his word, his commandments? His word is for all people, past, present, and future, no exceptions. We're not to pick and choose. The New Testament and food? Well, let's lay a foundation again by looking at Psalms 89:34. My covenant I will not violate, nor will I alter the utterance of my lips. What goes forth from his lips, he will not alter. Malachi 3, for I, Yahweh, do not change, and I submit his word does not change either. Malachi 4:4, immediately before the New Testament. What is Yahweh telling us? Remember the law of Moses. He doesn't say forget the law of Moses. It's going to be done away with once we get to the New Testament. Remember the law of Moses, my servant, even the statutes and ordinances which I commanded him in Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, for all Israel. And what did he command in Horeb or Mount Sinai? Well, part of it was the food laws there in Leviticus. And in Matthew 4, Yahshua says, but he, Yahshua answered and said, he's speaking to the devil here, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by a few of the words, no, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, out of the mouth of God. And there's more. Luke 16, verse 17. Yahshua says, but it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of a letter of the law to fail. It's there. It's not going to fail. Matthew 5, 17 through 18. Do not think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish it, but to fulfill. And truly I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. And you might say, well, as I've heard in the past, well, hey, he fulfilled the laws, therefore we don't have to worry about it. No, you look up the word fulfill, and it means to make replete, to gorge, to fill to the saturation point. And then an example follows there in Matthew 5, where he says, you heard it said you shall not murder, but I say unto you, don't be angry with your brother. He's filling that glass up to the brim. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I say unto you, don't look at a woman lustfully. Again, he's not doing away with the law of murder or adultery. He's just filling it up to the brim, making it replete. But what about, you might ask, Hebrews 7? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there must also be a change in the law. Well, you look up the word change in Strong's, and it means a transportation or transferal. In this case, it's referring to the transferal or transportation of the priesthood office, of the office of the priesthood, from the Levites to Joshua, our high priest. And of course, we are sub-priest under him today, as per 1 Peter 2, verse 9. But what about Mark 7, verse 5, where the Pharisees and the scribes ask Joshua, or Jesus, well, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands? Let's see, first of all, here, that they're talking about bread. They're not talking about eating an animal. Secondly, they're talking about whether you wash your hands or you don't wash your hands before you eat. Well, Joshua's response to them was something to the effect, hey, you're teaching us doctrines, the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandment of Yahweh or God, you hold to the tradition of men. So they weren't teaching or proclaiming what animals you eat or don't eat. They were talking about whether you eat with bread with impure or unwashed hands. We see as we continue on through the chapter that his disciples had a little problem with this, and they asked him about it, and then he says or said to them, are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach, and is eliminated? Thus he declared all foods clean. Did Joshua declare all foods clean? Yes, that which is edible, and he has defined as edible, is clean. Where did he define the foods as clean? Back in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. Yes, all foods, but remember that based on Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14, the word of Yahweh which does not change or fade away, that pigs, cockroaches, catfish, shrimp, and buzzards are not even considered food. We need to get back to the foundation. Acts chapter 10, and the sheet that contained the animals you might ask about. On the next day, as they, and he's speaking of 3 Gentiles here, were approaching the city, Peter went up to the housetop about the 6th hour, this is about noon, evidently, to pray. But he became hungry and was desiring to eat. But while they were making preparations, he fell into a trance, and he saw the sky opened, and an object like a great sheet coming down, lowered by 4 corners to the ground. And what did it have within it? All sorts of unclean animals, biblically unclean. The passage continues, and there were in it all kinds of 4-footed animals and crawling creatures of the earth, and, get this, birds of the air. We'll come back to that in a moment. A voice came to him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unholy and unclean. And this is years after Joshua, back in Mark 7:19, declared all foods clean. So Peter didn't miss anything. Again, a voice came to him a second time. What God has cleansed, no longer consider unholy. And of course, we know that this happened 3 times. Well, what did this vision mean to Peter? And what does it mean for us? Now, while Peter was greatly perplexed in mind as to what the vision he had seen might be, behold, the men who had been sent by Cornelius appeared at the gate. And while Peter was reflecting on the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men, by the way, does that relate to lowering the sheet 3 times, are looking for you. So what's the meaning of the vision? And he said to them, this is Peter later speaking to the Cornelius and his household, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner or to visit with him. And by the way, that wasn't Yahweh's law, not at all, but the characters of their day had come up with that injunction to keep away from the Gentiles. And yet God has shown me that I should not call any man unholy or unclean. That's what the vision represented. And what did he not say? and that I can now eat pork and buzzard with you Gentiles? No, that wasn't the point at all. And Peter readily figured that out and received the revelation from Yahweh to that end. And we see later that in Revelation 18, where the angel is crying out with a mighty voice, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird." Even years later, at the end of the age, we still have the unclean. Therefore, Yahweh didn't clean all the unclean animals. Let me tell you about my dream of 1970. I had been with a law firm, and I was leaving that law firm to start my own practice, a young lawyer, and I took, without their permission, and copied a form book that they had. It was about an inch thick. Forms for corporations, partnerships, wills, trusts, probate, etc., and took that with them, with me without telling them. A night or two later, I had a dream, and I am one of 3 shepherds at the bottom of a hill, and it's night. We have a campfire there, and my other 2 buddies are asleep. One of them is one of my best friends in high school, Ronnie. And then Yahweh speaks to me, and he says, "Roger, I want you to go up to the top of the hill where the flocks and the herds are, get Ronnie's fatted calf and bring it down to me and sacrifice it to me." I said, "Yahweh, I can't do that. That's Ronnie's favorite calf. That'd be bad. I can't do that." "Roger," I said, "go get Ronnie's favorite fatted calf, bring it down to me and sacrifice it." "No, I can't do that." A 3rd time he did that, and again I said, "No, I can't do it." Woke up next morning. I knew exactly what that dream meant. He gave me the interpretation. And that is, "Roger, you don't offer to me or sacrifice to me that which belongs to somebody else, to start your herd, so to speak, your flock in your law practice." So I got the point, destroyed that form book, and started developing my own. And by the way, I might add that now our law firm practice has some of the best forms that are available to lawyers for preparing wills, trust, powers of attorney, etc. Why? Because Yahweh blessed that flock, so to speak, after I did it His way. He was not telling me to steal. He was telling me that making a point through an absurdity that I knew could not be His word, and that is, go steal Ronnie's fatted calf. You see the same precept in Jeremiah 35 talking about the Rechabites. Yahweh told Jeremiah, said, "Hey, you bring them in to the house of Yahweh and to the inner one of the chambers and give them wine to drink." And these Rechabites had been told years before by their dad, "Hey, whatever you do, you don't drink wine, so that you may, in effect, dwell in this land in a long time. Don't drink wine, don't live in houses, but rather tents." Well, these Rechabites were faced with a choice. Now, is Yahweh saying that, or are we to follow the commands of our dad? We know we're to honor our father and our mother. And they said, "Jeremiah, we're not going to drink wine." And Yahweh comes right back at them, and in effect says, "You did good. You're staying with the word you originally received, and I'll bless you for doing that." And in effect says, "I wish the rest of my people would stay with the word." Romans 14. One person has faith that he may eat all things. In verse 14, "I know and am convinced," Paul says, "in the Lord Jesus, that nothing is unclean in itself. But to him who thinks anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean." Well, hey, really? Is Paul talking about being able to eat buzzards, spiders, and mice when he says, "may eat all things, nothing is unclean"? Don't think so. Let's take another look. In verses 1 through 2, "Now except the one who is weak in faith, not for the purpose of passing judgment on his opinions." This is an opinion of what a guy thinks he can eat or not eat. In the way as the next sentence explains, vegetables only one day, meat, etc. Is he to fast one day or not? It continues, "One person has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only." And in verse 6, "He who observes a day observes it for the Lord, and he who eats does so for the Lord. For he gives thanks to God. And he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat, and gives thanks to God." He's speaking here about fasting, or maybe fasting entirely, or just fasting from meats for a day. let's consider this. Does Paul trump Yahweh? Does Paul trump Yahshua? Don't think so. We know that when we look at 1 Corinthians 7:19, where Paul says circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing. What matters is keeping the commandments of God. And one of those commandments, hey, here's what you eat and what you don't eat. And again in Romans 3, Paul says, do we then nullify the law through faith? May it never be. On the contrary, we establish this law, in effect, through our faith that we have in Yahweh and the fact that he knows what he's talking about when it comes to what we're to eat and not eat. Well, here's the clincher out of Isaiah 66. And by the way, Isaiah 66 is about approaching his millennial kingdom at the end of this age, and we're just about there, and then entering into the millennial kingdom. And then look at what he says in verses 15 through 17. For behold, Yahweh will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. And I think he's speaking here about after the tribulation period, after his people have been whipped up on bad by the Antichrist. For Yahweh will execute judgment by fire, and his sword on all flesh, and those slain by Yahweh will be many. And then here we go. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go down to the gardens, following one in the center. In other words, the middle of the roaders, the so-called moderates, who are trying to work out their own salvation, so to speak. And then look here, those who eat swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice will come to an end altogether, declares Yahweh. We had best not be eating those things when he comes, when he returns, and it could be any day. Pig, swine, mice, detestable things. More confirmation. 1 Thessalonians 5:23. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify. Now there's that word again for making clean. You, how much? Entirely. And may your spirit and soul and body, our bodies, his tabernacle within which he now dwells, be preserved complete, without blame, at the coming of our Lord Jesus the Christ, or Yahshua the Messiah. In conclusion, the tabernacle of old was to be holy and clean, and there were no exceptions, as Nadab and Abihu found out. Why? Because that's where Yahweh dwells. And today, his tabernacle or temple is us, his body, and we individuals. We're to be holy and clean. 1 Corinthians 6, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? Be clean. Be a holy tabernacle, a clean vessel.